I just want to thank 1080. Appreciate you guys giving me the speaking engagement. Like he said, I've been collaborating with Matt and Jesse for the better part of a year. I think Matt's actually kind of like pinned in my text next to my fiance as my favorites because I'm always hitting him up, so he's trying to beat Matt. Yeah, and I just want to thank also my coworkers who are here, Henry Edelman, Richard Burney, our assistant director, James Perez, and my director, Colin Carroll, especially Coach Carroll. You know, he's given me the opportunity to kind of explore and do a lot with the 1080 to give me this opportunity to see how we can expand what we're using, and that's kind of what I'm diving into here, is about maximizing the 1080 in a different way. Obviously, it's a very well known as a resisted sprinting device, but there's more to it than that. And then on top of it, with football, there's more to football than just straight linear sprinting. We got to do multi-directional work. So that's what kind of led me to why I want to get into decel training. I spent a year with, and also, can you guys hear me? Do I need to like echo a little bit? Okay. So I spent a year with Les Spellman in San Diego, and that was kind of first where I started to realize the importance of deceleration training. He was microdosing it kind of throughout his week, and I started to realize that there was a massive discrepancy between what we see in training and then what actually occurs on practice and in the field, especially when we're talking about the magnitude and frequency of decels, right? Because usually in a game, high threshold decels, they're usually unpredictable and they're maximal. Something like I said, James Perez, our assistant director, he runs all our catapult stuff, does a great job with it. We collaborate and look through all our data. And what we wanted to see is we wanted to look at kind of the peak moments, right? The intense moments. And so looking at our games, right? On average, the peak moments acceleration-wise were 5.2 meters per second, okay? While when we were checking on the deceleration side, it was negative 7.3. Obviously negative because it's deceleration. But there's a massive gap there in intensity that we need to close, right? Tim Gabbett always talks about you need to prepare for the most intense moments of a game, right? So missing this piece or not training this piece can be a real hindrance on full football development. Okay. Also, in terms of that, when we're talking about especially non-contact injuries, you know, training decel acts as a robust training against the higher mechanically demanding task, right? When you look at the two compared to acceleration, deceleration can cause up to 6 times force on the body, and it happens in a more sudden window. So it creates and leads to a little bit more injury risk. So we almost have a vaccine against it. And then on top of it, super important to balance with max speed gains. So what happens is, right, everyone trains speed, everyone's getting faster. But the problem is you produce a faster athlete, they have the ability to create higher momentum. Higher momentum means harder to break from that momentum. So almost like you're putting your athlete at risk by doing one and not the other. We need to balance out the two so that as you pick up speed, you can break from that speed, right? You never drive a car without knowing what the brakes were inside. So we need to create a balance. And then lastly, and most important, football is about creating space or closing space. So speed is important, right? I once had a coach tell me that speed has no trade-off. I agree, but at a certain point, right, how we manipulate speed in terms of the technical and tactical variants of football are critical to success, not just straight line sprinting. Otherwise, we just have track athletes running it, okay? So I'm gonna go into our philosophy of how we program and train, and then also where the 1080 fits in before I actually talk about all of our programming. So to start, we're gonna use a slow to fast model and a short to long programming strategy. So what that means, if our exposures are all constraints led based. So when we start, whether the relative speed of the movement or the distance we afford them is gonna be small or slow, and then as we progress and intensify, we're opening up those distances, increasing speed exposure, increasing the eccentric demand throughout the entire year, okay? So we're looking at a macro level, right? When we're programming, I'm not thinking all trying to fit everything before spring ball. I'm thinking creating a holistic athlete from January all the way leading to training camp. We're also gonna use high-low principles in our model. So deceleration being a very neurally demanding task, it's gonna go on our high days, okay? And then we're gonna have weekly exposures on the field and in the weight room. In low doses because of the eccentric demand, we can't do too much volume, but it's gonna be sprinkled in the weight room and on the field. And this kind of comes from this idea, Damian Harper has done a lot of work on the braking performance framework, has talked about this. With speed, right, there's pretty good research out there every 5 to 8 days that you wanna touch it to maintain that quality. There's not the same research on decel work, but ideally it being a neurally demanding task, we want to be able to touch it every week to maintain those strength qualities, okay? And then of course in the weight room, it's just gonna help us complement what we're doing on the field to build tissue tolerance. In terms of where the 1080 comes into play, I honestly look at it as a special strength tool, right? That's a concept by Bergashansky. We can overload deceleration in the horizontal plane. So when you look at the weight room, it's more of a vertical emphasis, and we can get good things from that. But we're looking at task specificity. We want to find a way to use this tool that's going to transfer better over to training, okay? And then on top of it, right, when we're talking about deceleration, we're talking about overspeed work on the 1080. It challenges 4 unique things. Right? When you do overspeed work, it challenges your posture and your position, the timing of your force, and the magnitude, how hard you put that force in. Uniquely, those 4 things are also challenged in unanticipated competitive scenario decels. So yes, what we do on the 1080 is predictive in nature. I understand that. I know when they posted the video, I had a few people chirping at me that it's not chaotic, it doesn't look like football. But how you're being challenged, those demands match how you will be challenged from a raw capacity standpoint on the field. Okay? So I'm going to go into now how we trained it, right? How we did our off season and leading into our summer. Okay? So in phase 1, right, we want, now don't get me wrong, I love the 1080, but we didn't start out with it. We felt it was important. Me and Coach Carroll talked about this. We wanted to build a foundation of general strength qualities to handle these higher intense demands later on. Okay? So we wanted to make sure we taught our guys proper position and posture, right? So we're talking about a decel, low center of mass, low hip height, right? Your foot in front when you're striking, in front of your center of mass. Your shin not rolling over your plant foot. A tall trunk, right? All these things. So we use our band-assisted braking walks, which my video should play in a second, right, to teach those. Max tension, we use Perform X bungees. We have 5-foot ones and 10-foot ones, okay? And now it's to teach the initial deceleration mechanics. From there, at the same time, right, we want to surf the curve. We're not just going to go truly slow to fast. We want to touch aspects that are a little faster, a little slower. So we wanted a way to teach and intro the overspeed work we were going to do on the 1080. So what we did is what we called a band-assisted deceleration series, right? So we did with the same Perform X bungee bands, a partner would be at max tension, okay? On our change of direction days, we did unique movements. So our partner would be at max tension, and they would have to rapidly drop in and practice the positions and postures we are teaching in a more dynamic manner. So we would drop in on our COD days. We would have a lateral step, we would have a crossover step, and then a 45-degree step. And then on our linear days, where we were going to test the ADA, the acceleration and deceleration ability, we did a double leg decel, a lunge step, and then a 3-step lunge. And essentially, like I said, this was just to practice the positions and the postures we were looking for and entering what it felt like the guys to feel max tension dropping into what they were going to do eventually on the 1080, right? But because they're stopping, it had a little bit of longer ground contact times, okay? And what this also did uniquely, it exposed guys with fake stiffness. This is a concept that I got really interested about. I heard Ryan Grubbs of the Texans talking about this, that guys displaying fake stiffness, that when they go to decel, they're stomping their foot in the ground, but they have no compliancy. They don't want to go through a deep range of motion. So this allowed us to kind of expose that and see guys with that fake stiffness not dropping, not lowering their knees, their quads, their hips, and we can coach them out of those compensations, right? I think the video should play. Let's see if it'll play for you guys. So, right, these were the braking walks, max tension, low hip height, and then these were some of the deceleration positions we were training. And what I want you guys to see, I actually picked this video on purpose. You see at the bottom, my guy right here, right? Hip height's great, shin angle's great, torso's terrible. So this gave us an opportunity to coach them out of certain positions that we did not want, that were not favorable to proper decel mechanics before we ever got on the 1080, okay? And then of course, we also made sure that we were gonna put them actually in competitive scenarios and practice the tests they were gonna do. So we did unassisted linear deceleration and COD 180 training, okay? Over our initial phase, we just increased the distance, 5 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards, because naturally, right, you increase the entry velocity, you increase the demands on braking. And like I said, we're gonna complement it with the weight room. So in the weight room, we're trying to do things that focus on their ability to create better force absorption, handle eccentric forces faster. So you use dumbbell snap downs, right? 2 dumbbells going up top, dropping the hips down rapidly, okay? We use altitude drops, which is a little bit more faster, but still looking for that compression, right? Their hips going through a greater range of motion, okay? Power cleans. Something I want to touch on. I know everyone or a lot of people do power cleans. In terms of transfer of training, right? When you're looking at a power clean versus what people call full clean, squat clean, everyone uses a different vernacular. The thing about a squat clean, in Olympic settings, right, for Olympic athletes, it makes sense. You don't need to bring the bars high. You can ride the load down, and you can bounce out the bottom. When you look at a power clean, there's a rapid spike in eccentric demand, kind of like what we're looking for in the decel world. So I'm not saying we do power cleans because we're trying to get to transfer all the way for deceleration training, but it has a massive impact on trying to transfer over compared to our full clean. And then initially in our early phase 2, a lot of eccentric and isometric tempo with the idea of all the benefits that come with that type of training, teaching compression under load, feeling strong at the end ranges of motion that eventually they'll go into faster. We do it in a slow position so you can get the coordination necessary to execute the task. So this was our first initial phase, okay? From there, phase 2. This is later, off season, still before spring ball. This is when the 1080 was introduced. So one thing me and my boss, Coach Carroll, talked about is we still wanted some type of prep work from our baseline phase 1 to safely prep them into the 1080. So how it worked is we had 3 stations, right? And our guys are rotating. We split our groups into offense, defense. So each group you have about 45 to 50 guys spaced around 3 stations. At our deceleration station, they would do those band-assisted drop-ins paired with the 1080 work. How we progressed it is we added a rebound. So now we're putting a demand on the ground contact time. So you're having to drop in and then re-accelerate out and have a rapid changing of the hips. And this would be paired right into the 1080 work, okay? On our 1080 work, our COD testing, where you would go in a straight line, make a 180, was on our acceleration day, and the ADA test, where you go straight and break down in front of the unit, was on our max B day. And to be honest, we chose those pairings just because thematically, with everything else we were doing, it fit better, right? Because with all this stuff, there's a logistical component. It has to fit with the rest of training. I'm gonna skip these for a second. I'll come back so you can see it. Okay, so on the left and right, I just gave a 10-yard example, right? It doesn't have to be 10 yards, but I want you guys to see. So on the 180 COD, right, it's a predictive cut. We are telling them if they're gonna cut on the left or right leg, and we're doing both sides. So on the first one, on the COD, they're gonna sprint towards their position, wherever the ending part is. We tell them they have to strike with their foot, and then they're sprinting rapidly out, okay? For the ADA, again, ADA stands for acceleration, deceleration ability. So that's more raw deceleration ability. They're gonna sprint. We have a barrier we talk about that is their sprinting window. They have to sprint through that, and then what we did is provide a visual cue for our guys. We added cones to say no matter what, you can't go past this, okay? And as a rule of thumb, we always did half the distance. So if you sprinted 5 yards, I gave you a 2.5 window. If you sprinted 10 yards, I gave you a 5, you sprinted 15, so on and so forth, okay? So you guys can see that. They rapidly sprint through, and then they drop down, right? He actually kind of used the whole way. He probably could have put on the brakes a little bit earlier, just so you guys can get the visuals. From a cueing standpoint, this is where I kind of messed up. At first, right, me and Jesse talked about, right, we're trying to get total time down, right? You want to complete the movement as fast as possible. So I told the guys, hey, complete the movement as fast as possible. And what I realized in trying to drive intent is that I almost had them focus too much on the outcome that they forgot the process. So guys were deceling a little bit before the 10-yard mark, or when they were going to cut, they were falling short. That was kind of my fault. So what we switched is we were echoing max speed. So again, we looked at other things on the back end, but to our athletes, we were coaching max speed with the idea is we want them going into the cut as fast as possible. And it worked for better feedback, because when we taught the athletes and they have a speed they don't like, it was simple, really two things to explain to them. You didn't go into it fast enough, or you decelled pretty early. So I just wanted you guys to get those visuals. See if we go back. So programming wise, in this phase, we kept the assisted speed at 3 kgs. The idea being is, so 3 kgs, it is assisted, but it's very light. They'll feel it, but not to a big degree. We wanted guys, because this is all relatively new. This is the first season we've done overspeed work with our guys. I still want to focus on the technical aspects of it. So by doing this, keeping at a low assisted speed and building out the distance, they could self-regulate and still organize how they went into the cuts. So how the complexity increased is we increased the distance, keeping at 3 kgs, 5 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards, right? As the distance expands, then you have a higher increase on the braking demands because your entry velocity is naturally increasing. Right? And then we paired this with vector sprint cuts, because obviously we know football is not just played up and down. So to expose our guys, this was off the 1080. We do competitive racing, hitting different vector speed races, 135, 180, still all predicted, but they are being exposed to a little bit more chaos. Okay, and in the weight room, we just increased higher demands on their ability to absorb force fast and the eccentric strength component needed in deceleration. So we added a dumbbell, or with our snap downs, it became more horizontal, so they had to flip their hips under them a little quicker. The altitude drops, we added dumbbells, and then power cleans just naturally in the progression of our off season became heavier as we worked to mass testing. So we did all this work, right? Get through, okay? And this is where I gotta give a big credit to Jesse Green, wherever he is. Jesse Green helping me out. I kind of felt like, for those of you guys that seen the Green Hornet, I was like Seth Rogen and he was Kato. Like, he was doing all the stick stuff behind, being really creative. He was really, really helpful in looking through all this stuff. But essentially what we found, right, we could bucket our guys into 4 main archetypes. So what we saw, right, we had our slammers. These are the guys who, respectfully to either the COD or the ADA, they are willing to reach a high speed or a high max acceleration, and they can put the brakes on fast. These are your elite guys. We have what we called strikers. So these are guys, they can decel in a short time, but they didn't want to really reach a high speed or a high max acceleration. So you can kind of look at those kind of paired together, right? You probably can decel short because you're not going that fast. You had our gliders. These are guys who reached a high speed or a high max acceleration, but they took a long time to decelerate. So they probably couldn't handle the eccentric forces really well. And then our coasters, kind of our bottom archetype, they don't really willing to run into the sprint or the decel or the COD fast, and they take a long time, right? And so we can see the differences. I want to point out in the positioning too, if you look at this, one thing with the COD, rarely ever will you see them hit that 10-yard mark, because you got to realize it's on their hip. So their positioning on the 1080 is going to be about a yard, because their foot might be hitting the spot, but their hips are away from that. So that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But it's interesting to see, like you look at the ADA, right here, my striker, he got so worried about the deceleration, he started decelerating at the 7-yard mark, right? He wasn't even executing what I wanted. So these were things to help us look into it, okay? So essentially what we learned, most importantly what we found looking through the data, is that time to decel was the most related to the outcome. When we're looking at outcome of total time, how fast you successfully completed the COD or the ADA, that was the most predictive of the outcome, right? Your ability to create a high amount of force very quickly, shut down your velocity, was crucial, okay? And then we also saw, especially in our ADA, your max acceleration was highly correlated also to your time, which makes sense. You're farther from the decel point, you have that room to rev up, right? Most importantly, I think what was really interesting is there was no correlation between max distances and mass tests. So what that means is, if you were good at the 10.05, it did not mean you were good at the 10-yard ADA. If you were good at the 5.05 COD, You were not good at the 10.05. It was all around. Ideally, what it means, they're all task specific. You need to train both, right? And that gave us insights to what we're going to do in the summer. If I could bias one or the other, and I can't. They're unique tasks, right? The linear one is raw deceleration ability, whereas the COD one is positioning your angles. We need to train both. And that kind of aligns with what Damian Harper, who I mentioned earlier, who's done a lot of work on deceleration, he found as well. It's all task specific, it's all skill specific. One thing I want to hit on, right, I've only talked about 5 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards. A lot of the work he did, that Damian Harper did, right, at a certain point, right, you guys are probably thinking, why not 20, why not 25 yards? So at a certain point, your body's going to self-regulate, okay? If you keep increasing the distance, it doesn't mean their speed's going to naturally increase. What's going to happen is they start to self-regulate, the speed they're building up, they get worried that decel time is going to increase, which we're trying to eliminate. So what he found is they compared 10 meter and 20 meter. This was not on a 1080. And they found, in looking at velocity strategy, major difference. So your velocity strategy in a 10 yard and a 20 yard was huge. But then when they compared the 20 meter and the 30 meter, it was very similar. So that told me, right, I don't really need to open them out to a certain point. So we felt good about 15 yards being our peak because 20 meter was unassisted. So you look at 15 yards, right, slightly short but assisted, we're kind of meeting them in that middle, still getting that peak velocity we want and exposing them to those entry speeds without going to a point where we're getting a negative comeback. And then another thing I just want to point out too, right, that we can dive into is that you can also use it on the COD testing to look at limb symmetries. Obviously, I think this is better than any force plate because this is dynamic, right? This isn't one plane, this is actual motion. So we compare the left and right legs and we can see guys who really struggle on one side or another. Maybe it's a weakness, maybe there's an injury history we need to involve. The third layer that I'm looking to do is using this to help our coaches, right? How can we optimize guys to play on the football field, right? So if I can tell a coach, a receiver coach, hey, he's great cutting off his right side, you might want to throw him on that. Or the opposite, like, hey, he's really weak on his left. In practice, you might want to give him more opportunities on the left. So now this data is starting to help the people who it actually really matters, okay? So we took all this learning, and this is what we're planning to do in the summer, okay? So in the summer, we're still going to keep that band-assisted drop-in series with the rebound as prep going into our 1080 work. Now, the next piece is we want to increase the load, the assisted load, because at a certain point, by increasing this assisted load, you're increasing the horizontal momentum, which increases the braking demand, and the idea is that unloaded, they can handle higher threshold positions on the field. So our parameters, right, for 5 yards, we're going to stick between 5 and 6 kilograms of assisted work. For 10 yards, we're going to stick between 4 and 5 kilograms of assisted work. And then for 15, 3 to 4. This is where the bucketing comes into play. Something that my boss gives me a really hard time about is I'm stuck in the lab. Like, I'm a lab guy. I like the science of it, but it has to make sense. There's a logistical component. So when we're bucketing, there might be guys who are better at a 5 versus a 10 or a 15. It's not really realistic on a day of training to say, you're doing a 5 yard, you're doing a 10 yard. It's too chaotic. How we can bucket them though, is within these parameters I give, if you can handle higher decels, you're on the higher end. So if you've shown you can decel in a short amount of time, maybe on the 5 yard I'm giving you 6 kilograms of assistance. If you're weaker, we're still going to increase the price. You're going to have assistance, but you're on the lower end. So we essentially are still individualizing our training, but we're meeting their guys where they're at, okay? The concentric stays at 3 kilograms. I want this to turn into like an AEL, right? I want them to slingshot out of it. I don't need them trying to fight on the way out. So the entire time, the distance will increase. That's going to stay at 3 kgs. And obviously, they're inversely related because obviously, when you increase distance, you increase speed exposure. So as the distance goes up, you have to lower the kilograms for them to handle what they're doing, okay? And then our extra work, our sprint work, is going to be more reactive in nature. So maybe those vector cuts, we're giving them options. On a 135, you're sprinting up, you can take a right or a left. In the weight room, we get a little more specific, right? I learned from the data that time to decel is the most important. So I want to reflect that in the weight room. We're still going to do cleans because we're a heavy power clean program. Our split stance becomes more unilateral. So they're starting up tall and they got to drop down and put the brakes on really fast. And then depth jumps, I think, are a great way to train time to decel, right? You got to come down, display quick eccentric force, and then re-accelerate out onto a box. And that's going to progress from body weight to dumbbells. From there, okay, our last phase, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, in our last phase, this is where now I remove the 1080. Because at a certain point, right, I do feel like we're building the raw components to handle high decelerations, but at the same time, football is chaotic. So our goal, right, this would be post 4th of July, leading into training camp. Our goal now is to make it more like football. So I pulled away the 1080, we've built these good, strong qualities, and now it turns into small, medium, large-sided games. Specifically with the large-sided, right? I mentioned the research said 20 meters at peak point. That's where I get my 20 meter. I'll create a large-sided game where someone has to sprint in 20 meters or 20 yards before they make a high threshold change direction or a deceleration, okay? And this allows you to unload from the 1080, fill your body weight, get control, make it more like football, and already the high cognitive demand of what you're doing, having to make more decisions, makes it more complex. However, in the weight room, I'm still gonna peak training fast eccentrics and time to decel. So that split stance has a rebound. They gotta drop down and get back up quickly. The depth drops, I add an AEL component. So what we're gonna do is take 2 heavy dumbbells and tie bands. They're gonna step off the block and it's gonna rapidly pull them down, kind of like a 1080 does. This is more vertical emphasis. They're gonna let go and jump up. And then accommodating resistance in the form of bands. So this to me is the best time to use bands because you're still getting that fast eccentric component. And then nicely what we're gonna do is when we get to training camp, we're gonna stay with accommodating resistance, but we switch to chains. So they feel this natural unloading and it's not essentially demanding when practice intensity is gonna increase, okay? That's all I really have for you guys. Just kind of showing you the entire framework of what we did. Again, like, I never really used a day to test, right? Like, something me and Matt were joking about, like, training is testing, right? At no point did I lose a day of training to test them. We intuitively programmed, we looked at what we did, and then we refined as we went. That's what I got for you guys.